It was just another evening at the store until Jason walked in. He noticed something strange, a cashier struggling with broken arms, fear in his eyes, and two men closing in with dangerous intentions. Most people would have looked away, but not Jason. What he did next shocked everyone and changed one man's life forever. Stay with us, because this is a story of courage, calm, and responsibility that you don't want to miss. Jason stepped into the small convenience store just as the evening sky outside began to darken. The place was quiet, too quiet. A soft humming from the refrigerators, the slow ticking of a wall clock, and the faint sound of a radio behind the counter filled the air. Jason wasn't in a hurry. He moved calmly, the way someone does when they're used to noticing details. He grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar, then headed toward the checkout. That's when he saw the cashier. The young man behind the counter had both arms wrapped in thick white casts, stretching from wrist to elbow. Every movement looked painful. Scanning items took twice as long, and when he reached for the register, his hands trembled. Jason slowed down. The cashier forced a weak smile. His eyes, however, told a different story. Fear, exhaustion, and something close to panic. There was a faint bruise near his cheekbone, carefully hidden but still visible under the harsh store lighting. Before Jason could say anything, a man from the back room stepped out. He wore a tight jacket and an annoyed expression. "Hurry up," the man snapped at the cashier. "You're slowing the line." The cashier nodded quickly, apologizing under his breath. Jason felt a shift in his gut. Broken arms didn't just happen like this, and people didn't act that scared unless they had a reason. Jason placed his items on the counter. As the cashier struggled to scan them, one of the casts slipped slightly, revealing fresh bandages underneath. The cashier winced, but didn't complain. "You okay?" Jason asked casually, keeping his voice low and calm. The cashier hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the man behind him, then back to Jason. "Yes, sir. I'm fine." The answer came too fast, too rehearsed. Jason glanced around the store. 2 security cameras, one exit near the register, another door marked employees only. No customers besides him. The man from the back room stared at Jason now, his eyes sharp, suspicious. "Anything else?" the man asked, his tone cold. Jason picked up his receipt slowly. As he turned to leave, he heard the cashier whisper, barely audible, "Please." Jason paused mid-step. In that moment, he understood one thing clearly. Those broken arms were not an accident, and whatever was happening in this store was about to get much worse. Jason didn't leave the store. He stepped just outside the automatic doors, pretending to check his phone, but his attention stayed locked on the reflection in the glass. Inside, the cashier was struggling again, hands shaking as he tried to reorganize the counter with his arms trapped in casts. The man in the jacket leaned closer to the cashier and whispered something sharp. The cashier nodded quickly, fear flashing across his face. Jason felt the familiar pull in his chest, the quiet warning that told him trouble wasn't just possible, it was already happening. The store door slid open again. 2 men walked in. They didn't look like regular customers. No baskets, no shopping lists. Their eyes scanned the room first, then locked onto the cashier. One of them smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. Jason stepped back inside the store. He moved slowly, picking up another item from a shelf, acting like just another late-night shopper. But his eyes were working non-stop. The 2 men took positions on either side of the store. One stood near the exit. The other leaned against a freezer, arms crossed. The man near the counter spoke quietly. "You're late." The cashier swallowed. I needed more time." The man in the jacket appeared instantly, his voice low and threatening. No excuses. Jason heard it clearly now. This wasn't impatience. It was control. The cashier tried to open the register, but his cast slipped again. A sharp breath escaped his mouth. The man by the freezer stepped closer. "Careful," he said softly. "Accidents happen to clumsy people." Jason's jaw tightened. No shouting, no chaos. That made it worse. Jason shifted his position slightly, making sure he had a clear view of both exits. He noticed something else too. The store manager was gone. No one was calling for help. No one was stepping in. Jason walked up to the drink cooler and deliberately knocked over a bottle. It rolled across the floor with a loud clatter. Everyone looked at him. "Sorry," Jason said calmly. Slippery floor. The men watched him closely now, measuring, testing. Jason bent down slowly, giving himself time to think. Cameras were active. The cashier was injured. Other customers could walk in at any moment. This had to be handled cleanly. He stood up and turned to the cashier. "Hey," Jason said casually, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Which city is this again? I'm passing through." The cashier hesitated, confused. Before he could answer, Jason turned toward the camera mounted above the counter and smiled slightly. "Quick question for you watching right now. Which country or city are you watching this story from? Drop it in the comments." One of the men frowned. "You ask a lot of questions." Jason shrugged. "Just making conversation." The man near the exit casually reached out and locked the door. Click. The sound echoed in the quiet store. Jason noticed, and so did the cashier. His face went pale. "No one's leaving yet," the man said calmly. "We're just finishing business." Jason didn't react. No sudden moves. No panic. He slowly placed his item back on the shelf and turned to face them fully for the first time. "Business?" Jason asked. "Looks more like bullying." The man in the jacket laughed. "You don't want to be part of this?" Jason nodded. "You're right, I don't." The man took a step closer. "Then walk away." Jason smiled faintly. "I can't." That was when the tension shifted. The men realized something was different about him. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was focused, like someone who had already made a decision. Jason glanced at the cashier again. The young man's eyes were pleading now, silent but desperate. Jason spoke calmly. "You don't have to do this anymore." The man by the freezer snapped. "Shut him up." Before anyone could move, Jason kicked a small display rack sideways. It crashed loudly, spilling snacks across the floor and triggering the store's motion alarm. Lights flickered. The men shouted in surprise. Jason used the moment. "Everyone stay back," he called out, firm and controlled. He moved quickly, not toward the men, but toward the cashier. "Get behind the counter," Jason said. "Stay low." The cashier obeyed instantly. One of the men rushed Jason, but Jason sidestepped, using the fallen rack as a barrier. No punches, no wild fighting, just smart movement. Another alarm began to beep. Sirens could be heard faintly, not close, but coming. The men exchanged nervous looks. Jason stood between them and the cashier now, calm as ever, and in that moment, they finally understood. This was no ordinary customer, and they had made a serious mistake. The alarm kept beeping, not loud enough to panic the whole street, but loud enough to rattle nerves inside the store. The red light above the counter blinked slowly, like a warning heartbeat. Jason stood still. The two men stared at him now with open hostility. The calm balance of control they had a moment earlier was gone. They weren't used to resistance, especially not calm resistance. "Turn it off," one of them snapped at the cashier. The cashier didn't move. He stayed crouched behind the counter, eyes wide, breathing fast. Jason took one step forward. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just enough to say this ends now. "Leave," Jason said firmly. "Walk out. No one gets hurt. That's your best option." The man near the freezer laughed, sharp and forced. "You think you're in charge?" Jason didn't answer. The man suddenly lunged forward, trying to grab Jason's shoulder. Jason moved. He didn't punch. He didn't swing wildly. He shifted his weight, stepped sideways, and guided the man past him using his own momentum. The man stumbled, crashing into a shelf. Boxes fell. Noise filled the store. The second man rushed in faster and angrier. Jason backed up toward the counter, keeping space between them. He reached down and tipped over a rolling basket. It slid across the floor, forcing the man to stop short to avoid slipping. "Stay back," Jason shouted, not just to them, but to anyone who might walk in. The automatic doors rattled as someone outside tried to enter, then stopped. Locked. The men exchanged looks. Panic flickered in their eyes. "This wasn't supposed to happen," one muttered. Jason noticed the cashier trying to stand, struggling painfully with his broken arms. No, Jason said without turning. Stay down. You're safe. The man in the jacket pulled something shiny from his pocket. Not a weapon, but a set of keys, raised threateningly. Last warning, he said. Jason raised his hands slowly, palms open. I don't want to fight. The words confused them. Then Jason stepped backward and hit the emergency switch near the counter. The store lights snapped brighter. A loud recorded voice echoed. Emergency protocol activated. The men cursed. Jason used the distraction to move quickly to the side exit marked employees only. He pulled it open just enough to shove a large trash bin in front of it, blocking escape. Now there was only one way out. Past Jason. At this point, what would you do? Try to talk it out or get out as fast as possible? Comment your answer below. The men charged together. Jason stayed calm. He ducked, rolled sideways, and kicked a loose mop handle across the floor. One man tripped. The other slipped on fallen snacks. No brutal hits, no excessive force, just timing and control. Jason grabbed the fallen man's arm, twisted gently but firmly, and guided him face down to the floor. Stay down, Jason said. The second man scrambled up and ran for the counter. Jason moved faster. He vaulted over a small display and landed between the man and the cashier. The man froze. Behind the counter, the cashier watched in disbelief. This stranger wasn't fighting like someone angry. He was fighting like someone protecting. Sirens were louder now. The man backed away slowly. This isn't over, he hissed. Jason nodded. For you it is. The man turned and ran toward the entrance just as the door unlocked automatically. Police lights flashed outside. The man bolted, straight into two officers rushing in. Chaos lasted only seconds. The store went silent. Jason exhaled slowly. The cashier let out a shaky breath and leaned against the counter, eyes filled with relief. You're okay now, Jason said quietly. The cashier nodded, voice breaking. Thank you. Jason glanced toward the flashing lights outside. He knew this part wasn't finished yet. Because now the questions would begin. And the truth behind those broken arms was finally about to come out. The flashing red and blue lights painted the store walls in slow motion. Police officers moved quickly, securing the scene, separating everyone, and checking that no one was hurt. The two men who had tried to run were already in handcuffs outside, sitting on the curb with their heads down. Jason stepped back, hands visible, calm as ever. One officer approached him. Sir, are you injured? Jason shook his head. No, the cashier, he needs help. The officer nodded and signaled to a paramedic team that had just arrived. They rushed to the counter where the cashier sat, pale and shaking, his broken arms resting awkwardly on the surface. As the paramedics examined him, one of them frowned. These injuries aren't recent, she said quietly, and they weren't treated properly. The cashier looked down, silent. Jason stood nearby, close enough to hear, far enough not to crowd him. You're safe now, Jason said gently. No one here is going to hurt you. The cashier swallowed hard. His eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for days, maybe weeks. They said if I didn't work, he whispered, they'd come after my sister. The words landed heavy. The officer's expression changed instantly. Jason felt a slow anger rise, not explosive, not reckless, the kind that sharpened focus. The cashier explained quietly. The men were part of a small group that forced injured or desperate people to work long hours. If someone couldn't keep up, they were threatened. If they spoke, things got worse. The broken arms, an accident that happened when he tried to quit. The store manager had known. Worse, he had helped cover it up. Outside, another officer was already questioning the manager, whose confident tone from earlier had completely vanished. Jason listened without interrupting. He didn't rush the cashier. He didn't push. When the young man finished, Jason nodded slowly. You did the right thing surviving, he said. Now we make sure this ends. The cashier looked up at him, surprised. Who are you? Jason gave a small smile. Just someone who happened to walk in. One of the officers approached again. We'll need a statement, he said. You stopped a dangerous situation. Jason nodded. I'll cooperate. The officer hesitated. You showed a lot of control back there. Jason shrugged lightly. Control matters. As the scene settled, customers who had gathered outside whispered among themselves. Phones were still out, recording from a distance. Someone said, Did you see how calm he was? Another replied, He didn't even throw a punch. The paramedics carefully helped the cashier onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him out, he reached out awkwardly with his casted arm. Thank you, he said again. I thought no one would notice. Jason met his eyes. Someone always notices. Sometimes it just takes time. The store manager was led past them in handcuffs. He wouldn't look at Jason. Police secured the store and began collecting footage from the cameras. Footage that clearly showed intimidation, threats, and illegal activity. One officer turned to Jason. "You could have left. Most people would have." Jason looked toward the open door, where the night air drifted in. "Leaving is easy," he said. "Staying is the hard part." The officer nodded slowly, understanding. Outside, the crowd grew larger. Sirens faded as additional units left. The danger was over, but the impact of what had happened was only beginning. Jason stepped out of the store and into the cool night. Cameras turned toward him. People murmured questions. Who is he? Is he some kind of security? Did you see how he handled that? Jason pulled his jacket collar up slightly and walked past them without a word. Behind him, the cashier was being loaded into an ambulance, alive, safe, finally free. Jason paused for just a second and looked back. This wasn't just about stopping a crime. It was about breaking a chain, and Jason knew something else too. Once the footage got out, once the truth spread, this story wouldn't end here. By morning, the video was everywhere. Not because it showed chaos or fighting, but because it showed control. A calm stranger stepping between danger and someone who couldn't protect himself. Security footage from inside the store leaked first, then shaky phone clips from outside. Different angles, same outcome, Jason moving with purpose. The men backing down. The cashier finally safe. The headline didn't use Jason's name, no one knew it yet. Mysterious man stops exploitation ring at local store. By noon, reporters crowded the sidewalk in front of the convenience store. Police tape fluttered in the breeze as investigators moved in and out. The store manager's arrest became public, followed by confirmation that the group involved had been operating across several locations. What shocked people most wasn't the crime. It was how long it had gone unnoticed. At the hospital, the cashier watched the news from his bed, arms still in casts but his face lighter than it had been in weeks. A social worker sat beside him, explaining next steps, protection, and support. "They can't touch you now," she said gently. The cashier nodded. Because of him, Jason. Across town, Jason sat in a quiet interview room at the police station. No handcuffs, no pressure. Just questions. "You showed restraint," an officer said. "Most people wouldn't." Jason leaned back slightly. "Most people aren't paying attention." The officer paused. "You could have walked away." Jason met his eyes. "So could everyone else before me." There was no accusation in his voice, just a fact. The officer nodded slowly. Wu traced the group. "Your timing saved more than one person." Jason didn't respond. Praise wasn't why he stayed. Outside the station, the crowd grew. Someone had recognized him from old security work. Another claimed he'd seen him help during a flood years ago. Stories started stacking up, none confirmed, all consistent. A woman stepped forward when cameras were rolling. "I saw him guide kids out first," she said. "He didn't panic anyone." Another added, "He talked instead of hitting." That's rare. By evening, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just a crime story anymore. It was a question. Why did it take one stranger to stop something so obvious? Jason exited the station through a side door, hoping to avoid attention. He almost made it until a reporter called out. "Why did you get involved?" Jason stopped. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones extended. He turned slowly. "Because someone was hurting," he said simply. "And I was there?" "Do you consider yourself a hero?" someone asked. Jason shook his head. "No." "Then what do you call it?" Jason thought for a moment. "Responsibility." The word spread fast. Responsibility. Online comments flooded in. He didn't fight, he protected. "This is what strength looks like. Why don't we see more people like this?" The cashier's story was released with his permission. Donations poured in for his recovery. Messages of support filled his phone, strangers telling him he wasn't alone anymore. Late that night, Jason returned to the store one last time. The lights were off, the sign covered. A notice on the door read "Closed pending investigation." Jason stood there quietly. A police officer approached. "You changed things," he said. Jason looked at the door. "I just stopped ignoring them." The officer nodded. "That's harder than it sounds." Jason turned to leave. As he walked away, he felt something unfamiliar, not pride, not relief. Expectation. Because when stories like this go public, they don't just expose crimes. They wake people up. And Jason knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the attention. It was the beginning of a much bigger conversation. The courthouse steps were crowded by sunrise. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Cameras pointed toward the entrance where officers escorted suspects inside. The store manager kept his head down. The two men from the store looked smaller now, not dangerous, not powerful, just exposed. Jason watched from across the street, unnoticed. He didn't like crowds. He didn't like attention. But he needed to be there, not for himself, but to see this through. Inside, the hearing moved quickly. Evidence was overwhelming: store footage, witness statements, recorded threats, financial records. The judge ordered continued detention and full investigation into connected locations. When the ruling came down, a quiet murmur spread through the room. Justice had momentum now. Outside, the cashier arrived with a sling supporting his casts, flanked by a social worker and a police escort. He looked different, still injured, but no longer afraid. He scanned the crowd. Then he saw Jason. The cashier hesitated, then walked over carefully. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. Jason nodded. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." The cashier smiled, small, genuine. "Because of you, they can't hide anymore." Jason shook his head gently. "Because you spoke." The cashier swallowed. "I was scared." "So was I," Jason replied. The words surprised them both. A reporter noticed the exchange and rushed forward. "Are you the man from the video?" Jason turned slightly, shielding the cashier without touching him. "Yes," Jason said. "Why didn't you use force?" Another reporter shouted. "You clearly could have." Jason paused. "Because force ends moments," he said calmly. "Control ends cycles." The crowd quieted. "Let me ask you something. If you witnessed someone being quietly mistreated like this, would you step in, record it, or walk away? Tell me honestly in the comments." Police officers moved closer, not to restrain Jason, but to give him space. One officer leaned in. "You changed how people are talking about this." Jason looked around at the cameras, the crowd, the courthouse doors. "I hope so." The cashier's sister stepped forward, tears in her eyes. She hugged her brother carefully, then looked at Jason. "Thank you for seeing him," she said. JP nodded once. By afternoon, the story had spread nationwide. Not just the arrests, but the method. Analysts talked about nonviolent intervention. Commentators replayed the footage, slowing it down, pointing out how Jason never escalated, never struck first, never lost control. Schools asked to show the clip in ethics classes. Police departments requested training copies. The message was spreading faster than the crime ever had. Jason slipped away quietly as the crowd grew louder. That evening, he returned to his small apartment. He turned off his phone, sat in silence. Let the noise pass. A knock came at the door. Jason tensed, then relaxed. It was the officer from the store. "We won't release your personal details," the officer said. "But people are asking." Jason nodded. "They always do." The officer hesitated. "You could do more. Teach. Lead." Jason looked past him out the window at the city lights. "Heroes stand in front," he said. "Examples stand beside." The officer smiled slightly. "Fair enough." As night fell, online comments continued pouring in. "This made me think. I walked away once, I won't again. Strength doesn't have to be loud." Jason read none of them. But he felt the shift. Because tomorrow, somewhere else, someone would hesitate and remember this story. The cashier went home that night with protection, support, and a future that was finally his own. The men who thought they controlled him sat in silence, facing consequences they could no longer escape. And Jason packed a small bag, because his job wasn't to stay. It was to remind people what was possible, and that reminder had already begun. Weeks passed, but the story didn't fade. If anything, it grew. The convenience store incident became a reference point, not just for news segments, but for conversations in homes, classrooms, and workplaces. People weren't sharing it because it was loud or shocking. They were sharing it because it felt possible. A calm man, a quiet decision, a real difference. The store reopened under new management. Fresh paint covered the walls. New staff worked the counter. A small sign near the register read, "If you feel unsafe, please tell us. We will listen." The cashier returned one morning, no longer in casts. His arms were still healing, but he stood taller now. Customers recognized him and smiled. Some nodded with respect. Others simply said, "Good to see you." He was no longer invisible. Across the city, Jason watched, none of it on a screen. He had already moved on. In a small town miles away, Jason stopped at another store, different place. Same quiet hum of refrigerators, same ordinary feeling. He grabbed a bottle of water and waited in line behind a tired-looking woman and her young son. No trouble, no danger, just life. And that was the point. Because the true impact of what happened didn't belong to Jason anymore. It belonged to the people who watched the video and felt something shift inside themselves. A teacher paused the footage during class and asked, "What would you have done?" A bus driver stepped in when he saw someone being pressured unfairly. A teenager called for help instead of looking away. A manager noticed fear in an employee's eyes and asked questions. Small moments, quiet choices. But they added up. One evening, a short interview clip resurfaced online, Jason's single-word answer from the courthouse steps. Responsibility. It became a caption, a comment reply, a reminder. The cashier later recorded a short message himself. "No drama, no anger. I didn't need someone to fight for me," he said. "I needed someone to see me." That clip reached millions. And then, just as quietly as he had appeared, Jason disappeared from the story. No book deals, no interviews, no spotlight. Someone asked a police officer once if they'd see him again. The officer smiled. People like that don't announce themselves. Jason walked through another city at dusk, blending into the crowd. He passed people laughing, arguing, rushing home, living their lives. None of them knew his name, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. They don't always raise their voices, and they don't always stay. Sometimes, they just step in long enough to change the direction of a story. Jason stopped at a crosswalk. The light turned green. He crossed with everyone else, just another person. But somewhere behind him, someone else noticed something that felt wrong and remembered what one calm stranger once did. They didn't look away. They stayed. And that was the real ending. If you believe real strength is about protecting others, not showing off, type respect in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful action stories like this.